rhythm. Thomas Merton said, happiness is not a matter of intensity, but of balance, order, rhythm, and harmony. Nowhere is this more true for a retiree than in having a regular rhythm in which they receive their paycheck to rock the kind of retirement they want to rock. And this is what we've been exploring this month on the Retirement Answer Man show. Welcome. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host, and this is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but to rock retirement. And so over the month of February, we've been exploring how do we create a system to have a paycheck in a rhythm that gives us confidence that we're going to be okay. And this week, to end this month-long series, I want to explore, is having cash reserve bucket systems enough? And what an alternative might be to have even more clarity on how the rhythm of your paycheck is going to sound. So I'm excited about this. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, I want to give you a quick teaser for next month because we're going to arrive at Albuquerque. We're going to take a left turn and we're going to explore a virus that is particularly afflicting baby boomers and anyone entering their 50s and 60s, and that is the RV virus, the recreational vehicle virus. Now, the interesting thing about this virus is that it can take you down. But if you manage it correctly, it can actually enhance the kind of retirement that you have. So that's what we're going to do in the month of March. Hey, we can't do anything until we have that all-important disclaimer. As always, don't take advice from the gentleman in your ear at this moment. Don't take advice from me on the show. I only give advice to clients I walk life with as a fiduciary. And unless you're one of those, this is helpful hints and education. And before you make any decisions, talk to your advisor. That could be legal, that could be financial, that could be your tax advisor. That just makes common sense. That'll help you keep a good rhythm in life. So there's your disclaimer. Now let's go explore 8 ways that we can make this whole retirement thing way too complicated. So in the news today, the Oracle from Omaha has ascended the highest peak and said there seems to be some perverse human characteristic that likes to make easy things difficult. So true. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not sure when Mr. Buffett said this, but it makes total sense, and I'm guessing this is a pearl of wisdom that he has bestowed. And when it comes to retirement, this human characteristic of making easy things difficult definitely applies. Now, retirement is not easy. I'm not implying that it's just this super simple thing. It is complicated. But I think there are a lot of ways that we, meaning most people, but also many advisors, make it much more complicated than it needs to be. And I want to review 8 things to help maybe mitigate this human characteristic for you and for me. So number 1 is, one way we make retirement much more complicated is we make decisions in isolation. Whether it's to take Social Security, taking a pension or a lump sum, or the pension option that we have, a withdrawal strategy, we tend to have an issue that we want to deal with, and we focus solely on that issue in calculating the optimized answer without taking into account the broader perspective of your entire financial situation or your life. We tend to focus on tactics, and that's very normal. You got a boo-boo, you got to fix it, rather than going back into the body of what the symptoms are that caused it in the first place. That's why I'm a big believer in having a process that follows a system that creates a strategy that leads you to the tactics. If you follow it in that order, process, strategy, tactics, these tactical decisions become much more clear. But unfortunately, if we start with the tactic, we end up having a whole bunch of different tactics going in different directions that aren't coordinated, what really doesn't lead to an optimum solution and can be a lot more difficult to manage. The number 2 way that we make retirement more complicated than it needs to be is we have way too many accounts. We have an IRA here, an IRA there. We have a 401k there. We have a 401k way over there. Oftentimes when I'm engaging a new client, we'll look at the net worth statement and there'll be accounts all over the place. What happens is, and this makes total sense, it's just like your closet, and we've talked about this before, is you collect things over time. You change jobs and you leave the 401k there. Or you started an IRA there and then you decide to start one over there, but you never consolidated the first one and it just adds on, just like shoes or jackets or what have you. That can work while you're working and saving and working and saving. It's not optimal, but it can work. But when you get to retirement, focus is really important. So it's time to clean all that up because it gets too complicated to try to manage. Now, this leads to the third thing, which is related, which is having way too many investments even in one account. Now, individually, we can do this. We can just buy things over time that look attractive to us, and maybe they had a purpose at the time, but we never clean up behind us, and we end up with this huge list of investments. I've seen accounts, one account, with 50, 60 different investments, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, a UIT here and there, just to add some spice with no rhyme or reason. And it makes managing the risk-return allocation, the asset allocation, much more difficult. Now, it's not just us individuals that do this. Many times, and I'll call them out, I've seen Fidelity have, asset allocation services where they charge a fee and they manage the allocation. And I've brought on clients that have had accounts like these, and they'll be managing and trading around 30 or 40 different mutual funds, and it's just sort of a mess. And the question is a question of utility. Does adding that extra investment or having that extra investment add value? Does it have a useful purpose in the overall plan to rock your retirement? It's a higher bar than I think many of us apply. So that's number 3. Number 4 is having too many cooks in the kitchen, meaning we got too many people making different things or putting their hands in the recipe that you're trying to create. My wife and I watch a show. I think it's a Great British Baking Show or something like that. We're obsessed with it right now. It's like a reality show where they're baking pies and breads and things like that. Each contestant has their own little kitchen under this tent, and they're assigned a recipe, and they are responsible for baking it. And they come up, even though they're baking the same class of things, they come up with these very different versions of bread or pastry, and they're all individually very delicious and very well thought out and coordinated most of the time. Imagine if you had 3 or 4 of them at the same little table under the tent, the same little kitchen, making one bread or one pastry. Each one of them has their own philosophy, artistic expression, flavor biases. It probably would end up being a bloody mess. And I think the same thing happens when you have too many advisors, or count yourself as an advisor, or too many hands in the kitchen trying to create it. It just creates complexity that doesn't need to be there. So that's number 4. Number 5 is market timing and chasing investments. Being optimistic when things are good because it feels good, and then switching when things get a little rough, and you end up getting whipshawed back and forth in buying when things are good, selling when things are bad, and it can really hamper you, and it creates a lot of unnecessary activity, whether it's expenses, tax expense, mental expense, worry, and intellectual wasted effort when it doesn't really need to be that complicated. But it feels like we're more in control and activity. And that's the thing with activity, especially when it comes to investment. It feels like we're more in control because we should be doing something. So let's do something. And as long as I'm doing something, I feel like I have a handle on things. Advisors fall to this, but so do individuals. And a lot of times, if you had a good process in the beginning that led to a good strategy and led to good tactics, a lot of times you don't have to do a lot or worry about a lot. So market timing makes things much more complicated. Now, number 6 is, okay, great. You're going to have a process. I am going to do my withdrawal strategy following this method that I read or heard on some podcast or some book. That's awesome. You found a process that resonated with you, and so you implement it, and then a year later, you listen to a different podcast or you read another book. Oh, I like that process. That process seems pretty cool. I'm going to switch to that one. And then a year later, you do the same thing. And then a year later, the key to having a good, solid process is to have one good, solid process. If you hop from process to process to process, it's no different than hopping from investment to investment to investment. You really don't have a process if you don't have one process. Does not mean a process can't evolve. Mine has evolved greatly. We'll talk a little bit about that today, but it has to be an iteration, not a redo, unless it, the major redo, I guess, but in general, it has to be an iteration, an evolution as more information becomes available, not just wholesale changes of process. So that's number 6. And number 7 is we make things much more complicated because we think more information will give us more clarity. And I say information, I didn't say wisdom. There's a big difference. More information, whether it's CNBC, multiple books, multiple podcasts, at some point, you'd need to come to decisions. And what more information, quote unquote, will give you is more of an opportunity to make things much more complicated because you're going to go squirrel and run that direction, squirrel, run that direction. You see how all these are related? I know this because I've seen it in clients. I've seen it in advisors, and I've seen it myself. I am really diligent about managing the information that reaches me. In some ways, I feel like I'm very uninformed relative to other people I talk to because I'm not following the latest trends or paying attention to those things because I'm trying to stay focused. So like a horse, good analogy, like a horse, I have blinders on. It doesn't mean I don't know what's going on around me. It just means I'm focused on what my task at hand is. And where I find myself getting into trouble is when I start looking around at what's going on around me, what all the cool people are talking about, and then I get distracted and go, squirrel. This is one way that we can make retirement much more complicated than it needs to be. And then number 8, and you can see how all these are related. Number 8 is we can make things more complicated than they need to be by just simply over-planning, over-analyzing. We can create these amazing spreadsheets. We can tweak our inflation data, our market capital assumptions, our spending data over and over again. And it makes us feel good because we're working it. We're figuring it out. We're dialing it in. But here's the problem. All of that quest for preciseness has nothing to do with getting more accurate and more clarity of how this is all going to work out. So we make it more complicated. Not that the extras, I'm not saying don't pay attention, don't iterate, don't be intentional about these type of things. I'm just saying to a point because we can make it so much more complicated and it can stress us out. It can become a whole second job when if we have a process where we're iterating and having little conversations, we're going to have just as good or maybe better solutions than if we did all this extra work. Now I'm going to throw another wisdom bomb on you from a smart person, although I've never met him, Bruce Lee. And this is sort of the approach that I've tried to take in my practice is I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. Focus, my friend. Focus so you can rock your retirement. Now let's go talk about creating a paycheck and getting a rhythm in retirement and get some clarity on how you do that so you can rock yours. All All right, to finish up the series on how to create a paycheck in retirement, I want to explore a next iteration on the traditional cash reserve buckets. So to just set this up, we've talked about how do you create 2 years in cash reserves and recreate a paycheck. And then in theory, what happens in that structure is the rest of your money, the money invested in your asset allocation, will be diversified in some target allocation. And you'll have a mix of bonds, likely in bond mutual funds or ETFs and stocks. And then as you rebalance those, you'll start to glean off the amount of money that you're going to need to refill your buckets. A lot of that structure is based off of what's called the probability-based approach to retirement planning, which is a lot of what you've seen in the retirement plan lives of counting the cost, calculating the cash flows, and running Monte Carlo scenarios to get an understanding of what percentage of the time could all this work out, given the variability of returns. So it's based on an odds of success and systematic iteration, meaning you do it over and over and over again like a compass so you can make sure you catch wrong turns quickly and recorrect so you're not way off of course. Now, there is another approach to retirement planning that's more along the line, the safety first approach, which is more focused on sort of the magnitude of what failure could look like. Meaning, if you make a wrong turn and you don't make an adjustment quick enough, you're hitting a wall. So it's focused more on safety first and, acknowledging maybe a little bit more overtly, hey man, if we screw this up, it's really bad. And so it has a little bit more risk management baked into it. And I like both approaches, to be honest with you. I like the iterative approach, the more agile approach, but I think if you have the ability to do the safety first approach, it's something to consider because it may give you more clarity on this rhythm of a paycheck, but there's a cost to everything, and it's understanding whether it's right for you. And it all comes down to, at least in the context of this discussion, is 2 years enough cash? If we look at market returns, sequence of risk is a lot of what we're trying to deal with here. What return sequence might we get? Am I going to retire when markets are horrible or when they're great or anywhere in between? So if we look at allocations, and I'm just going to go from 1950 to 2015 because I don't have the updated data on this. But if we look at a portfolio that's 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds, just using indexes, the S&P 500 and Lehman aggregate, I believe. If we look at 3-year rolling returns since 1950, so 3-year rolling returns means that we go from month to month, January 2050 to January 2053, and then February to February. So you have a lot more iterations or data points to manage. But if we look at 3-year rolling returns for a portfolio that's 60% in stocks or 40% in bonds from 50 to 1950 to 2015, on average, it's had a return of about 9.2% a year. Not bad. Now, okay, I got to do this disclaimer. It's a little bit at the end, but hey, all investments have risk. Past performance is no guarantee of history. You can't invest in an index. And make sure you talk to your advisor before you make any decisions. We're just talking numbers here. So that 3-year returns for a 60-40 portfolio, about 9.2% per annum for 3 years was the average. The best 3-year period was about 25.6% per year. I want that one. But the worst 3-year average was negative 6.2% a year. So if you have 2 years in cash reserves and you enter one of those very negative, you lost money every single year for 3 years, how do you refill your 2-year bucket? What are the possible adjustments that you could make? Well, number one is you could batten down the hatches. You could slow down your wants and your wishes. We did a lot of that in 2008, managing through this is, we slowed down some of the discretionary spending. Number two is you could run the iterations not just on all of your needs and wants and wishes, but you could say, okay, what are my base need? That base lifestyle, what is that from a funding perspective relative to the sequence of returns? So I know worst case if I had to get rid of all the wants and wishes because of life. But number one is you could batten down the hatches. Number 2 is you could ramp up pre-retirement, assuming you had that option, meaning you hit one of these super bad cycles, well, maybe you work a little bit to try to mitigate the damage. And then lastly, you could readjust your long-term goals. Now, statistically, what are the odds of you hitting one of those? I didn't calculate it for this episode. And some of this is going to depend on how quickly you iterate in terms of making little adjustments. The more off course you are before you make adjustments, the less flexibility you're going to have. But it poses the question, if it's really about risk management and managing against worst case, are these 2 years enough? So what do you do if you say, no, they're not? I want more clarity that I am going to be able to maintain, this lifestyle. I don't want to have to iterate. I don't want to have to be agile. I want more clarity. Well, an overlay on top of this 2-year cash reserve system could be something that we call the income floor, which we do when it is appropriate. And what we do is we assess it with each individual client. So the income floor overlays on top of those 2 years cash reserves a floor to cover the spending in years. Typically, we start with 3, 4, and 5. So that way you have more of a runway of clarity of where your money is going to come from. And the goal with all of this is building a system that you can manage that can help reduce sequence of return risk, can still give you some positive upside for success, meaning improvement if we happen to hit a really sweet period from an investment standpoint. It can help reduce overspending risk because we have a system in place where we've counted the cost and agreed on that. And then it can also help reduce behavioral risks, meaning that by having this income floor on top of the cash reserves, we feel more confident so we can let the longer term portfolio truly be longer term, and we're less apt to get scared out of the markets. So what are the elements of this kind of income floor? So we basically have 3 tranches or 3 categories. We have those cash reserves that we've talked about. We have a income floor for years 3, 4, and 5. And then we have the rest of your assets in what we'll call upside portfolio that can be more appropriate for inflation hedging and long-term growth. So we have those 3 layers rather than just the 2. So the elements of that is those near term, so cash reserves for 1 to 2. Midterm, years 3, 4, and 5, you can fund that in a number of different ways, either buying individual bonds that mature. You build your own little mini ladder to lay the path in front of you, or you could use funds or ETFs. We're not going to get into some of this logistical stuff here as a result of time. And then you can have your long-term upside portfolio that could be a more growth-oriented allocation, possibly have more dividend-paying investments that are throwing off income to help with the whole thing. But the idea is just to build more clarity. And I've been using this approach more and more in tandem with the more iterative approach, especially early in retirement when the time frame is the longest. We're going through a lot of change, and the sequence of return risk is much bigger than it is later in life. So how do you determine whether you should add this income floor on top of a normal cash reserve? Well, number one, I think what can influence the decision is the level of your base needs that are funded by social capital. Remember, social capital are your pension, your Social Security, guaranteed income sources that you feel confident are never going away. A higher amount of social capital, the more comfortable you can feel with deviations from normal market behavior, those outliers. So that might lend you not to worry so much about building a really long-term floor. The less social capital you have, the more you may want to lean to having some more certainty in other ways so you don't have to change your life. And number 2, another way you can determine is what level of human capital do you have to help fund those needs, wants, and wishes. If you have royalty income or ongoing income from whether it's part-time work, consulting work, and you have a lot of security in that, there may be less of a need to build this income floor on top of those cash reserves. So you want to make sure you evaluate that as part of this. And then third is your level of overall fundedness, which we haven't really been able to get into yet. We definitely will in the club, which is if you are underfunded, meaning you don't have enough saved to really make all this work, it's going to be near impossible to have an income floor, to come up with the money to fund the bonds or build a ladder. to fund it. Unfortunately, if you're underfunded entering retirement, it's going to have to be human capital that's going to be your biggest lever. Because if you rely only on financial capital, the markets, you're sort of in a really bad place because you need returns. You need to take some risk to get returns because that's the only way it works. But you're in a position where you're least able to deal with market downsides. It's a really bad place to be. If you're constrained, meaning you should have enough money, but it's, there's some possibility certain fact sets come through that you're going to be way overfunded or you may be a little underfunded, it might be a place that you can do it. But then again, you're going to have to figure out how much do I need to fund this? And we'll get into that in the club. But if you're overfunded, meaning you clearly have way more than enough to support the kind of life that you want to live, you're going to have the flexibility to create more clarity, but you also have the ability to be more agile if you choose. And then lastly, it's going to be a personal profile. Some people just want to have that clarity. Other people are comfortable, but I think those are the things that are going to determine whether you can even do this floor. And then if you can, whether you need to and how much, because by doing the floor, you may give up some more upside. But I think any of this, whether it's the cash reserves or the floor, the whole point is to be able to maintain a rhythm so you can have some confidence, especially in early retirement. And if you're dealing with this subject, I would go back and listen to the entire series and go through the steps so you can create your system to establish your rhythm, because that's going to go a long way to helping you make better decisions and navigate something that really no one's in a mass scale had to navigate before. So with that, let's go on and get happy with Nicole. Welcome to the Happy Lab, where we live a crazy, crazy, happy life. Nicole, I understand that it is Pirate Day today.
It is. My preschooler is learning P is for pirate, so they were supposed to dress up today, and he wanted to go to school like an hour early because he was so excited about being dressed as a pirate.
And what else is happening? You have Teacher Appreciation Day.
It's Teacher Appreciation Week, so I am on the hospitality committee, and we're supposed to be providing food like 3 days this week. Plus, I'm supposed to send my kid with like the teacher's favorite things and a school supply or something like that.
A little chaotic?
Yeah, a little bit. And then next week, there's some Dr. Seuss themed something, and every day is like a theme that my son is supposed to do crazy socks and wear a hat and all that kind of stuff.
Which is
they're going to be old enough to keep track of this on their own soon, right?
Because you're sort of the project manager, right?
At this point, yes.
Yes. So how do you maintain sanity, calm, and stay happy in such a chaotic world? I mean, do you have rituals that are sort of like your Calgon that takes you away? Reading?
I read a lot, and I have to write everything down. If I don't write it down, it does not happen. So that includes like, I need to write down like, hey, go do something for yourself now.
Oh yeah, we've talked about that before. But so you do have rituals that keep that rhythm. So when everything else is chaotic, you're like, okay, I know I'm doing this in this way.
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
And I think that's the point of this Happy Lab. And that's sort of the point of creating the system of paychecks. Because when you retire, your world stays crazy. It's just a different kind of crazy. So it's good to have some kind of rhythm. And I think establishing a paycheck as a rhythm can at least give you some ballast to the winds of life that push you all over the place. I think you'll be happier for it. I'll be your ballast, Nicole.
Sounds like a good idea.
I will be your ballast, okay? I'm going to be very consistent. I'm not going to go squirrel on you anymore.
Now, let's not overpromise things here.
I'm sorry, did you say something? I was looking at something over there. Okay, let's go set a smart sprint.
Smart sprint.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a 7-day baby step to take a baby step to...
So many steps. I think we're stepping too much.
Just 7 days, one thing. That's all I'm really trying to do. 7 days, one thing. So over the next 7 days, I want you to identify one thing. It could be in your retirement planning. It could be in your life. I want you to identify one thing that you feel you're doing, that you're overcomplicating things, and figure out how you're going to stop it. how you're going to get a little bit simpler. Nicole.
Roger.
We are about to enter March, and something special is happening at the end of March. March 25th. March 25th, if I am not mistaken.
Can I tell?
Go ahead.
We are unlocking the clubhouse again, and we will be opening enrollment to the Rock Retirement Club March 25th through April 3rd.
I think April 3rd. And so we closed the clubhouse at the beginning of January after our initial launch. We have over 150 people in there. And we've been slowly getting people that are interested and saying, hey, we would like to be part of this special group that are walking life together, learning and inspiring each other to really rock retirement. And we actually got some questions. Why is it closed? It's not like technology is limiting anymore. And to be honest with you, it's a good question. And my response was, we're really trying to get the spirit of the club correct. You get the right kind of people walking together. Walk with the wise, become wise. That's our motto. And so we're just taking it slow to make sure that it stays something special and we build it from here. So we're opening up March 25th. So if you have an interest in top-notch education with no sales pitch, tools to help you take action, and inspiration from others that are like you on the same journey, go to rockretirementclub.com, enter your email, and you'll be notified with some information about when the opening is coming, what's going on in the club, and then you'll be all set up to decide whether it's a fit for you. So rockretirementclub.com. All right, you guys have a great week. Bye, Nicole.
Bye, Roger.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.